Rain hit the ground like bullets at 3:27 a.m. when Private Maya Singh crouched behind the broken wall of what used to be a school. Her combat boots were soaked through, but they were the only thing keeping her feet from bleeding on the sharp rocks and broken glass that covered the abandoned town. The mission was simple: get in, gather intelligence on enemy positions, and get out before dawn. But nothing about this war had been simple for the past 8 months. Before we dive in, tell us, where in the world are you watching from?
If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing.
Let's get started. Maya pressed her back against the cold concrete and listened. Somewhere in the darkness, she could hear the low rumble of enemy vehicles moving through the streets. The town of Kreshkov had fallen to enemy forces 3 weeks ago, and now it served as their forward operating base. Her unit had been tasked with mapping their defenses, but when they reached the rendezvous point, only Maya had made it. The others were either dead or captured, and she was alone in hostile territory with nothing but her rifle, a handful of ammunition, and the hope that her training would be enough. She moved carefully through the shadows, her boots making soft splashing sounds in the puddles that had formed between the rubble. The enemy had set up checkpoints at every major intersection, with searchlights sweeping back and forth across the empty streets. Maya had memorized their patterns during her first hour of observation, and she knew she had exactly 43 seconds to cross the main road before the next sweep would catch her. As she reached the edge of the building, Maya saw him. Sergeant Kane Whitmore stood under a flickering streetlight, his uniform pristine despite the rain. He was supposed to be back at base camp, but here he was, talking quietly with 3 enemy soldiers. Maya's blood turned to ice as she watched him hand over a manila envelope and accept a small metal case in return. Her own sergeant, the man who had trained her, who had saved her life twice in the past month, was selling out her unit. Maya raised her rifle and centered the crosshairs on Whitmore's chest. Her finger found the trigger, but she hesitated. She needed proof. She needed to understand how deep this betrayal went. As she watched, Whitmore shook hands with the enemy commander and started walking toward her position. Maya melted back into the shadows, her heart pounding so loud she was sure he would hear it. Whitmore passed within 10 feet of her hiding spot, and Maya could smell the cigarette smoke that always clung to his uniform. She waited until his footsteps faded before emerging from cover. The enemy soldiers had dispersed, but she had seen enough. She needed to get back to base and report what she had witnessed. But first she had to survive the journey through 15 miles of enemy-controlled territory. Maya started moving south, using the storm drains and abandoned buildings to stay hidden. The rain was getting heavier, which was good for concealment but bad for everything else. Her boots were falling apart, the sole of the left one coming loose and flapping with each step. She had been walking for 2 hours when she heard the dogs. The sound of barking echoed through the empty streets, growing closer by the minute. Maya broke into a run, splashing through ankle-deep water as she tried to reach the old factory district where she might find better hiding places. But the dogs were faster, and she could hear their handlers shouting commands in the enemy's language. She ducked into an alley and pressed herself against a dumpster, trying to control her breathing. The first dog appeared at the mouth of the alley at 5:15 a.m. It was a massive German shepherd, its ears forward and its nose working the air. Maya slowly reached for her sidearm, but the movement caught the dog's attention. It barked once, sharp and loud, and then charged. Maya rolled to the side as the dog leaped, its jaws snapping where her throat had been a second before. She brought her pistol up and fired twice, the shots echoing like thunder in the narrow space. The dog dropped, but she could hear more coming. She ran deeper into the alley looking for an escape route, but found herself trapped in a dead end. The enemy soldiers appeared, 5 of them with 2 more dogs. They were shouting at her to surrender, their weapons trained on her chest. Maya raised her hands, her pistol dangling from one finger by the trigger guard. One of the soldiers stepped forward and grabbed her weapon, while another began searching her pockets. They found her identification tags and spoke rapidly among themselves. That's when Sergeant Whitmore appeared. He walked into the alley like he owned it, nodding to the enemy soldiers like old friends. When he saw Maya, his expression didn't change. No surprise, no guilt, just cold calculation. He said something in the enemy's language, and the soldiers laughed. Then he walked over to Maya and looked her up and down like she was a piece of equipment he was inspecting. "Private Singh," he said, his voice the same calm tone he used during training exercises. "You always were too curious for your own good. Did you really think you could spy on me and get away with it? Maya stared at him, trying to process the betrayal. How long? She asked.
How long have you been selling us out?
Whitmore smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Long enough to matter. The enemy pays well for good intelligence, and I've always been a practical man. Your unit walked right into that ambush because I told them exactly where you'd be. The words hit Maya like physical blows. Her friends, her brothers and sisters in arms, had died because of this man. She lunged forward, but the enemy soldiers grabbed her arms and held her back. Whitmore watched her struggle with amusement. You know what the funny thing is? He said, kneeling down to unlace her boots. These boots probably cost the army $200. Good leather steel toes designed to last, but they're wasted on dead soldiers. He pulled off her left boot, then her right, leaving her standing in the cold water in nothing but her wet socks. Consider this a lesson in the real world, Private. Nothing belongs to you if you can't defend it. The enemy soldiers dragged Maya to a transport truck and threw her in the back. As the vehicle started moving, she saw Whitmore walking away, her combat boots slung over his shoulder like trophies. The betrayal burned in her chest worse than any physical wound, but beneath the anger, a cold determination was forming. The prison camp was 30 miles north of Kreshkov, a collection of prefabricated buildings surrounded by razor wire and guard towers. Maya was processed like cargo, photographed, fingerprinted, and assigned a number. They gave her a gray uniform that was too big and canvas shoes that were too small. The other prisoners were a mix of captured soldiers and civilians who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maya spent her first week learning the routine. Wake up at 6 a.m. for roll call. Work detail from 7 to 5, usually breaking rocks or digging ditches. Dinner at 6, lights out at 9. The guards were professional but not cruel, which made escape planning easier. They were confident in their wire and their weapons, but they underestimated the determination of soldiers who had nothing left to lose. The opportunity came during her third week. A supply convoy had broken down outside the camp, and half the guards had been sent to help with repairs. Maya was working in the laundry when she noticed that the fence behind the building had a loose section where a tree had fallen during a storm. She waited until the guard had moved to the other end of his patrol route, then slipped through the gap. Maya ran barefoot through the forest, her canvas shoes having fallen apart 2 days earlier. The pine needles and sharp rocks cut her feet, but she didn't slow down. She could hear the sirens from the camp behind her, and she knew she had maybe an hour before they organized a proper search. She needed to put as much distance as possible between herself and the prison before they brought out the dogs again. She ran for 3 hours, following game trails and stream beds to mask her scent. Her feet were bleeding and her prison uniform was torn in a dozen places, but she was free. As the sun began to set, Maya found an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the woods. She broke in through a window and collapsed on the dusty floor, exhaustion overwhelming her. Maya woke up at 2:30 a.m. to the sound of helicopters. She peered through the cabin's dirty windows and saw searchlights sweeping through the trees. They were close, maybe half a mile away, but they were moving in the wrong direction. She gathered what supplies she could find in the cabin: a rusty knife, some fishing line, and a can of beans that was only 3 years past its expiration date. She needed to get back to friendly territory, but first she had unfinished business. Sergeant Whitmore had taken more than just her boots. He had taken her trust, her faith in the system, and the lives of her friends. Maya had spent 3 weeks in prison planning what she would do when she escaped, and those plans didn't involve running home to hide. Maya spent the next 2 days moving south, staying off the roads and avoiding populated areas. Her feet had developed thick calluses, and she had learned to step carefully to avoid the worst of the rocks and thorns. She lived on berries and stream water, and twice she caught fish with improvised traps made from the fishing line. On the third day, she reached the outskirts of Kreshkov. The town looked different from her new perspective. Where before she had seen it as enemy territory to be avoided, now she saw it as a hunting ground. Maya found an abandoned apartment building with a view of the enemy command post and settled in to watch. Sergeant Whitmore was still there, still playing both sides of the war. Maya watched him for 6 hours, learning his routine. He met with enemy officers every morning at 9, always at the same cafe on the main square. He carried a leather briefcase and always sat at the same table, facing the street so he could watch for threats. But he never looked up at the windows above, never considered that danger might come from above. Maya spent another day preparing. She found materials in the abandoned building to make a simple but effective weapon: a length of pipe, some wire, and the springs from an old mattress. It wouldn't win any awards for engineering, but it would serve her purpose. She also found clothes that fit better than her prison uniform: dark pants and a jacket that would help her blend into shadows. At 8:45 a.m. on a Tuesday, Maya positioned herself in a third-floor window directly above the cafe. She had a clear shot at Whitmore's usual table, and the morning sun would be behind her, making it harder for anyone below to spot her silhouette. She waited, her improvised weapon ready, her breathing slow and controlled. Whitmore appeared at exactly 9 a.m., just as he had every day for the past week. He ordered coffee and opened his briefcase, spreading papers across the small table. Maya watched him through her weapon's crude sights, remembering the faces of her dead teammates. Johnson, who had 3 kids back home. Martinez, who was planning to propose to his girlfriend. Stevens, who had saved Maya's life during her first firefight. Maya squeezed the trigger. The projectile struck Whitmore in the shoulder, spinning him out of his chair and onto the concrete. Maya was already moving, climbing down the building's fire escape while chaos erupted in the square below. Enemy soldiers were running toward the cafe, their weapons drawn, but they were looking for threats at ground level. Maya hit the alley running, her bare feet silent on the wet pavement. She could hear shouting behind her, but she had planned her escape route carefully. 3 blocks south to the old market district, then east through the storm drains that ran under the main road. The enemy would expect her to head for friendly territory immediately, but Maya had learned to think like a predator, not prey. She found Whitmore in the enemy field hospital, his shoulder bandaged and his arm in a sling. He was conscious but groggy from pain medication, and the guard at his door was reading a magazine instead of watching the corridor. Maya waited until the guard went for coffee, then slipped into the room. Whitmore's eyes widened when he saw her. He tried to reach for the call button, but Maya was faster. She grabbed his good arm and twisted it behind his back, her voice a whisper in his ear. "Remember me, Sergeant? The soldier whose boots you stole?" Whitmore tried to speak, but Maya pressed her hand over his mouth. "I want you to listen very carefully. I escaped from your friend's prison camp. I tracked you through enemy territory. I shot you in broad daylight in the middle of their stronghold. And now I'm here, in their hospital with nothing but my bare hands and the skills you taught me." She let that sink in for a moment, watching fear replace the pain in his eyes. "The question is, what do you think I'm going to do next?" Maya released his mouth and stepped back. Whitmore gasped and looked around the room as if expecting help to appear. When none came, he focused on Maya's face, searching for any hint of mercy. "You can't kill me here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They'll catch you before you get out of the building." Maya smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Who said anything about killing you? Death would be too easy, too quick. I want you to live with what you've done. I want you to wake up every morning knowing that one of your own soldiers hunted you down like an animal. I want you to remember that you were taken down by a barefoot woman in enemy territory." She reached into her jacket and pulled out his combat boots. She had taken them from his quarters while he was unconscious, and they looked exactly as she remembered. Polished leather with steel toes, designed to last. Maya dropped them on the floor next to his bed. "These don't belong to you," she said. "They belong to the soldiers who died because of your greed. Wear them if you want, but remember who they really belong to every time you lace them up." Maya walked to the window and looked out at the courtyard below. Enemy soldiers were still searching for the sniper who had shot their informant, but they were looking in all the wrong places. She turned back to Whitmore one last time. "I could have killed you a dozen different ways since I escaped. Instead, I'm giving you a chance to do the right thing. Turn yourself in. Confess what you've done. Try to find some small piece of redemption before this war ends." Whitmore stared at her, his face pale with shock and pain. "And if I don't?" Maya's smile grew colder. "Then I'll be back. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe next month. But I'll be back, and next time I won't be so generous." She climbed out the window and onto the fire escape, moving with the silence and grace of someone who had learned to survive in impossible circumstances. Behind her, she could hear Whitmore calling for the guard, his voice high and panicked. But Maya was already gone, melting back into the shadows of the enemy-occupied town. Maya made her way back to friendly territory over the next 4 days, traveling at night and hiding during the day. Her feet had become like leather, toughened by weeks of walking on rough ground. She avoided enemy patrols and checkpoints, using skills she had learned in training and others she had developed during her time as a prisoner and fugitive. When she finally reached the forward operating base, Maya was debriefed by intelligence officers who couldn't quite believe her story. A Barefoot soldier who had escaped from prison, tracked a traitor through enemy territory and confronted him in the middle of a hostile city? It sounded like something from a movie, not a real military operation. But the evidence supported her account. Satellite imagery showed the attack on the cafe. Communications intercepts revealed the panic in enemy ranks when they realized someone had infiltrated their stronghold. And 3 days after Maya's return, Sergeant Kane Whitmore surrendered himself to enemy forces and confessed to his crimes. The war ended 6 months later, and Maya was awarded the Silver Star for her actions. She kept the medal in a drawer and rarely talked about what had happened in Kreshkov. When fellow soldiers asked about her experience, she would simply say that she had learned the importance of good boots and leave it at that. But sometimes late at night when the barracks were quiet, Maya would think about those weeks when she had nothing but her determination and her training. She had discovered that the most powerful weapon a soldier could carry wasn't a rifle or a grenade. It was the refusal to give up, the willingness to keep fighting even when everything seemed hopeless. Maya never wore combat boots again after the war ended. She preferred simple hiking shoes or sneakers, something light and comfortable. But she kept a pair of military boots in her closet, polished and ready, just in case she ever needed to remember who she really was underneath all the civilian clothes and peaceful surroundings. The boots were a reminder that strength didn't come from equipment or rank or the respect of others. It came from within, from the part of a person that refused to surrender even when surrender seemed like the only rational choice. Maya had learned that lesson in the worst possible circumstances, hunted like an animal through enemy territory with nothing to protect her feet, but calluses and determination. She had proven that sometimes the most dangerous soldier was the one who had been stripped of everything except the will to fight back. And in the end, that had been enough.